What if I told you that this year's Ferrari car has a defect that not even its own engineers detected, but that Lewis Hamilton felt from the first corner? A problem that compromises race pace, stability, and even the driver's confidence. What exactly did Hamilton discover in Singapore? It didn't take long for Hamilton to notice. The connection with the car simply did not exist. Unlike other drivers who require weeks to adapt to a new environment, Lewis has a fine-tuned mechanical sensitivity like few others on the grid. During training, his radios with the team already revealed a tone of veiled disappointment. Phrases like "the car feels disconnected" or "the front part does not respond the same in each corner" began to be repeated. In each run, Lewis tried again and again to adjust his style, try different lines, play with balance under braking. But the SF25, instead of rewarding him, punished him with inconsistencies. During Saturday's qualifying, those doubts turned into technical frustration. Despite applying a conscious adaptation to his driving inspired by the technique of his teammate Charles Leclerc, releasing the accelerator earlier to generate greater stability in curves, Hamilton could not replicate his sensations from the simulator or reach the limit of the car without feeling like he was crossing an invisible line. The most worrying thing was not the lack of pure pace, but the feeling that there were variables that were beyond his control as a driver. When the SF25 reacted differently in similar curves, when the front axle lost grip in sectors where it had previously been firm, a pattern of erratic behavior began to emerge that went beyond what the setup or the tires could explain. The race in Melbourne confirmed his fears. After a good start, in which he gained positions and showed flashes of his classic aggressiveness, Hamilton was trapped behind slower cars without being able to execute the overtakes as he wanted. The mixed conditions, with rain in certain sections of the circuit, brought to light what would be the first major sign of the problem. Every time it had to brake and turn in low grip conditions, the car seemed to lose its structural balance. It was not simple oversteer or understeer. It was a loss of confidence in the dynamic behavior of the SF25. The car did not respond coherently to the driver's input. Telemetry confirmed small irregularities in the balance of forces between the front and rear axle, especially in urban and slow sections. Hamilton, who had arrived at Ferrari with the intention of accelerating his integration and being competitive from the first race, realized that he was facing a much greater challenge. Instead of fighting for podiums, he was forced to learn to tame a car that he did not understand, that did not speak his same language. This time, the change was not just about the team. It was about technical philosophy, about driving sensations, about work culture. And the most frustrating thing for Lewis was that, while many media and commentators were talking about adaptation or a lack of rhythm, he already suspected that there was a deeper problem. It wasn't a question of feeling or setup. What Hamilton felt that weekend was not just sporting disappointment. It was the certainty that something was wrong with the base of the car. Something that the engineers had not detected in the preseason. Something that would completely change the narrative of his year with Ferrari. In modern Formula One, where the margins between success and disaster are measured in milliseconds, even the slightest design error can become a sentence. And that is precisely what Lewis Hamilton, with his vast experience, detected in the SF25. A defect as specific as it was invisible, as technical as it was decisive. It was not an obvious problem, one of those that manifests itself with smoke coming out of the engine or with a dramatic breakdown in the middle of the race. It was a silent but structural failure. One that was born in the very architecture of the front suspension, and that could not be corrected with simple adjustments to the weekend setup. After the Singapore Grand Prix, Ferrari intensified technical reviews following concerns conveyed by Hamilton. What they found was disturbing. The root of the problem lay in the geometry of the lower arm of the front wishbone, a critical piece that acts as one of the main channels for transmitting information from the asphalt to the driver's steering wheel. A subtly flawed design in its working angle created a phenomenon that engineers described internally as asymmetrical microbounce. In simple words, under certain lateral loading conditions, especially when the car brakes and turns at the same time, the two sides of the front suspension did not behave in a synchronized manner. This generated a minimal but constant oscillation that directly interfered with the precision of the front axle. Telemetry at first did not offer conclusive answers. The data seemed normal, but Hamilton insisted. He asked for comparisons with the dynamics of the SF24. It required simulations with asymmetric loads. He wanted to check if his feelings were founded or the product of a failed adaptation process. And it was there, in the nonlinear compression simulation, where the truth appeared. A difference of less than 4 mm in the response of the left arm compared to the right arm under specific loads. Technically insignificant. But in a Formula One car, that minimal variation can be enough to destabilize the entire balance of the car. The failure did not stop at mechanical behavior. It also interfered with the work of the flat bottom and the diffuser. Being a car that depends so much on ground effect, any variation in the height of the nose affected the aerodynamic flow that runs through the bottom of the car. If the front axle did not maintain the optimal height constantly, small load losses were generated at key moments. This translated into sudden understeer, loss of grip on the rear axle, and even difficulty in heating the front tires evenly. Hamilton, in his private conversations with the team, was clear: this is not a feeling problem. This is a design flaw, a misconception that had to be treated as such. His intervention was decisive for Ferrari to activate a profound review of the front suspension package, including new compression data, dynamic response, and structural resistance. Without that pressure, it is likely that the defect would have remained undiagnosed for much of the championship. The irony of all this is that Ferrari had opted for a more aggressive suspension design in 2025, seeking to gain stability in fast corners and maximize the efficiency of the new flat bottom that promised so much in the wind tunnel. But that theoretically brilliant bet turned out to have an Achilles heel: mass management under lateral braking. And it was that small mistake, that miscalculation in transitory behavior, that ended up undermining the confidence of his star signing from the first race. But the reality was different. The car was born fast in the wind tunnel but unpredictable on the asphalt. And Ferrari knew it. I had known it before the Australian GP. He had heard it in Leclerc's conversations. I had seen it in the data. And now he heard it in every word of a Hamilton who was not willing to remain silent. To publicly accept that mistake would have been to admit that, once again, Ferrari had failed to execute. And in Maranello, pride weighs as much as championship points. So they chose the most comfortable path, that of silence. But in Formula One, silences also speak. And this time they spoke louder than any press release. The problem that Hamilton detected in the SF25 not only affected its own performance. What began as a personal feeling behind the wheel soon turned into a technical rift that affected Ferrari's entire competitive structure. As the races progressed, the consequences became impossible to ignore. Ferrari, which was coming off a solid 2024 season where it had demonstrated strategic evolution and consistency, began to show signs of fragility just when it most needed to make the definitive leap towards the championship. Internally, tensions began to arise. The technical department, divided between defenders of the original concept and supporters of a structural redesign, began to fragment. Frédéric Vasseur, the team leader, tried to maintain cohesion with a speech focused on progressive improvement, but he knew that time was against him. The SF25 was not a slow car, but it wasn't a championship car either. It was a linearly fast car, technically unpredictable and structurally fragile. And in a season where consistency rewards more than flashes, that fragility could be the difference between dreaming of the title or settling once again for third place on the podium. From Fiorano, the work is incessant. Hamilton has spent hours in the simulator, testing different setups with track engineers and comparing technical variables that would normally be out of a driver's reach. His goal is not just to improve the car for himself, but to provide a coherent development roadmap for the rest of the year. He has asked to evaluate experimental configurations even in free practice sessions, something that Ferrari did not usually do in the past. But this time, the urgency justifies everything. And meanwhile, in Maranello, the update package for the Canadian Grand Prix is being prepared. It will be the first of 3 big changes scheduled before the summer break. Although from the outside it will be presented as an aerodynamic evolution, internally it is known that the real objective is to mitigate the effects of the structural failure without breaking the regulations. If the package works, Ferrari can make up some of the lost ground. If it fails, it will be clear that SF25 is a promise that cannot be fulfilled. That's what happened with the SF25. On a grid full of aerodynamic promises, futuristic designs, and increasingly sophisticated simulation tools, it was a driver, not a machine, who raised the red flag for a critical defect. While the data suggested normality, Hamilton felt a void. The disconnection. That lack of uniform response that separates a competitive car from a champion. And he was not satisfied with adapting. He didn't ignore it. He investigated it. He broke it down. And he explained it with the rawness and lucidity that only those who have touched perfection and know when they are far from it have. The question that remains in the air is whether Ferrari will be willing to go all the way. To trust the pilot who has already proven to be right. Because Hamilton already did his part. He detected the problem that no one wanted to see. And now the future of the SF25 project depends on whether the Scuderia has the courage to face it, and rebuild on that truth.